Right, welcome to the course. This is the first session, and in this first session, we're just going to talk briefly about the cards themselves and what you have purchased if you purchase cards, and what you have already in front of you if you own cards. Um, your tarot cards are your tarot cards, and I don't personally subscribe to any of the superstition involved with tarot cards, like having to sleep with them for 6 months or burying them in soft peat. They're pieces of cardboard. The real power of the cards, for me, and you are welcome to disagree, is that the images on the cards trigger your intuitive and unconscious processes. They go beyond logic if you allow them to. Now, I think it's going to be much easier for somebody who has never done anything on tarot to get into the vibe of this rather than somebody who's got 20 years history on tarot, because you may have to start unlearning or at least seeing things slightly differently. I am not a fan of doing tarot readings um, because the word reading is wrong. And I think when you're engaging in working with the tarot with other people, it's a conversation, it's not a reading. And I also believe that the tarot cards themselves are not the oracle. You are the oracle, and you've used the tarot cards enough to understand your own intuitive connections. The cards are a trigger for your oracular senses. They're the trigger for your connection. But more importantly, these cards will help you reflect upon your own spiritual journey. And some of the talks I've done, I call it personal alchemy. And alchemy is the turning of lead into gold in that kind of fairy story idea. But for me, spiritual alchemy and personal alchemy is stripping away some of the ideas that we have on a material level and looking for the spiritual gold that lies within us. And no doubt I'll return to that theme um, over time. So your tarot deck has 78 cards. It has 22 of what's known as the major arcana and 56 of the minor arcana. And I think it's rather interesting when we look at these cards as to what their origin is. And the origin is not, as you may think, in fortune telling. The major arcana is 22 cards, number from 0 to 21. The word arcana means mystery. And the cards are also known as trumps, major trumps, which gives you an inkling as to where the cards originated. They're part of a card game. And the card game was called Tarocchi. And it was kind of like our whist or our bridge. And these trump cards actually won suits. Later, they developed artwork that began to be linked to certain mystery teachings or secret societies. And it's those cards that we're talking about now, the cards that somebody has decided very recently in history, by the way, to put in a series of symbols and ideas that can trigger your own inner learning. And I think that's important. It's important that this is about you and your growth. The minor arcana, well, they mimic regular playing cards. There's four suits and there's ace to king. The only difference between a regular deck of playing cards and a tarot minor arcana is that there are four royal cards because it includes a knight. Sometimes they're called princes and princesses, sometimes they're called kings and queens, but you see there is a hierarchy within the minor royal cards. What I find is really interesting is the minor cards are linked to the elements as defined by Plato, earth, air, fire, and water. And there's also links to the season, and maybe you can work that out yourself as to which suit aligns to which season. And this is the key point. The minor cards are subtle mirrors of the major cards. And the only card they do not mirror is the Fool. And we'll see why that is in subsequent lessons. So as you look through these cards, recognize that you have 22 cards that are trumps, and they're given the name major, and you have 56 cards that are minor, with 4 raw cards, including a knight. There are the minor arcana is 10 laid out, and they're very interesting. This is from the Rider-Waite deck. If you have another deck, then you might have to start thinking about it. But the reason I've asked you to use the Pamela Colman-Smith Rider-Waite deck is that the images on these minor cards are very thought-provoking. And you will notice that possibly with the Ace of Wands, which is the top one there is a series of stories going on within each card. And it's the story within the card that makes it really interesting. And with the next row, which is the cups, there's a story going on with the cups. And there's a story going on with the swords. And there's a story going on with the pentacles. And it's really interesting to ponder the nature of the story that the cards from Ace to 10 tell you. What is the story it's telling you? Who are these people? What are they doing? Why are they doing it? And if you look at the cards vertically, so all the aces, and then all the twos, and then all the threes, and all the fours, you may find there are links between the different suits of the cards of the same number. So what's the two of wands got to do with the two of cups? Is there a connection? What about the two of swords? What about the two of pentacles? And it's part of your job to put away the little booklet that came with your cards. Ignore it, please. I don't want you to think about those ideas yet. You can go back to them. But what I want you to do now is actually start to think about your personal reaction to the cards, because it's all about that. And so I did suggest that you get yourself a journal. And this will be your guide to your tarot journey. And I don't care what kind of journal it is, and maybe you use computers, maybe you use an old-fashioned leather journal, whatever, but make the journal solely for the journey in the tarot, or make folders on your laptop for that journey. And what I want you to do for your first journal activity is lay the minor cards in rows, as the picture is, and look carefully for any patterns you see. And as you move from Ace to 10, do you notice any themes that are reoccurring? Then you look at the columns of cards, the aces, the twos, the threes, and notice themes or ideas that pop into mind. And then look briefly at each of the 56 cards and capture initial feeling or thought for each. Now, that sounds like it's simple. It is, but there's a lot there. If we go back to this, it's a question of you starting wherever you want and looking at what do you get from the three of wands, for example. What's going on there? What story? What feelings? Do the colors of the cards, squint at the cards, does the color of the cards in your set say anything? Do the images jump out at you? And this is your journey to start to record in your journal what you feel initially from the cards. Again, this is going to be much easier for beginners than it is for those who believe themselves to be experts. I think one of the things about experts is sometimes we forget that we need to learn new stuff. And I think it's a really good idea to try and approach this stuff with an empty mind. And the empty mind means know nothing mind. So be open to things I say. I'm not expecting you to agree with everything I say, by the way. What I am suggesting is that you open yourself up to the possibility, especially when it gets a little bit more intense and comes to your personal growth. So that's the first thing to look at. Yeah. And I reckon that's going to take you a few weeks, which is why I'm spacing these lessons a month apart. Okay. Now look, this is the four aces from the Pamela Colman-Smith Rider-Waite and Rider and R3 Waite deck. And as you look at the four aces, again, when you get to this task, again, you know, what do you notice about the four aces? Well, the first obvious thing, surely, is there's hands in it. What are the hands holding? What are they doing? What's going on in the picture? What's your thoughts about each of these aces? And of course, you may well have done that already because you did every single card in the suits. But coming back to the aces is a really good starting point because there's a thing in magic, and yeah, let's call it magic, that is known as correspondences, which is one thing links to another. And this is the richness of the tarot deck. The people that designed the modern tarot deck, albeit in the 18th, 19th centuries, had in the back of their mind a set of correspondences, ideas they wanted to link to each card. So the tarot deck becomes a symbolic system, all right? And we're going to explore these correspondences as we go into the deck and into the major cards. But what I'd like you to do is to make sure that in your journal, you start to create your own personal reaction to the cards, but also thoughts about what are the things they correspond to. Does a person, does a flower, does a situation, does a color, does a star sign come to mind? Because now we're getting into something quite interesting. I'll give you this one first. Traditionally, the suits correspond to the specific elements. So coins or pentacles are earth. Think of it as money, yeah, which is a material thing. Swords often correspond to air, and a sword slices through the air. Wands or batons, sticks, create fire, and so they respond to fire, and cups respond to water. Now, if you're a member of the occult course and occult lessons, you will have already started to explore these elements in much more detail. And I would recommend that if you're really interested in this, you pick up on the lessons in the occult course, which is on the blog and stuff, that actually support this. You don't need to do it because I'm going to cover some stuff, but it goes into much more detail in the occult course because in that we're going to be creating rituals and stuff. But on this course, when you think of Earth, what does that mean to you? Well, Earth, somebody who is earthy, somebody who's practical, maybe. The earth in which plants grow. When you think of air, well, the airy quality of people, their thoughts, their ideas. The air blows. Yeah. What do you think when you think of fire? Well, fire is transformative, it changes. And when you think of water, what do you think? Well, actually, emotions are connected to water. So all of these correspondences are worth becoming very aware of because as you create these notes in your book, it's how you start to understand the depth of these cards. Now, please, there is no right or wrong here. There's just ideas and, shall we say, more useful ideas. For example, there are a whole group of people who, on the tarot, want to make swords fire and batons air. Now, part of me can see some of their reasoning, but for me, it doesn't quite work. And the way I think about it is a sword, when used, swishes through the air. Batons and sticks, when you rub them together, can create fire. So for me, that works perfectly. Okay, but for you, it may be different, and that's perfectly okay. So if I'm thinking of coins, I'm thinking of money, material things, possessions, things to do with the earth, earthy people. When it comes to swords, I'm thinking of ideas, inspirations, movement, rapid movement, breezy movement. When I think of wands or batons, I'm thinking of fire, transformative, uh, light bringing and life destroying as well as life bringing. And when I think of cups, I tend to think of water and emotions. And water can be tranquil, like a gentle stream, or it can be vicious and flowing really fast, as in a raging sea. Okay, now I'm hoping that what I've said there has inspired you to create some mental images to these things And that's what I'm trying to get you to do. Your journal needn't just be full of words. It can be full of images that you've either drawn or images you've captured from places, because your journal will become your guide to the tarot and the essence of your journey through the tarot. I hope that makes sense. So if you really want to get deeply into the minor arcana, I've offered this diagram here, because if the minor arcana and the suits relate to the elements, then at some point they must relate to the qualities in the zodiac. Now, I don't need to spend too much time on this right now. We are going to come back to it. But in case you're interested, we know that there are earth signs, there are fire signs, and there are water signs. And this is where those astrology signs fit. It may be that you like the idea of visiting, finding out what your suit is, what your card is. So say, I don't know, I'm Aquarius, then 5, 6, and 7 of swords might be ones that I want to look at and meditate on. If I find mine, I'm Aries, so 7 wands, 6 of wands, and 5 of wands are important to me. And I may like to look at those cards and see what I get from them. Don't push this at the moment, by the way. It's not as straightforward as saying somebody's all Pisces or 10 of Cups. It's not as simple as that. But this is a simple, interesting guide you can look at. One of the things that I think is interesting is that in our symbolic language, what we know as stereotypes in modern language, symbolically, our stereotypes and the links to our stereotypes have a value. They shouldn't, but they do. They shouldn't drive our behavior and our perception of others, but as I say, they do. But they can help us understand ourselves. The other thing about the zodiac, and that's another topic completely, is my attitude to astrology is you may be born an Aries, but the challenge is to grow through each of the signs and understand yourself in relation to each of the signs, because astrology is one way to get onto the cycle of personal alchemy or spiritual alchemy. I'm going off topic, and you'll find that quite a lot. I'll throw snippets out that you can either chase me up about or follow up yourselves. But right now, it's about grounding you in the cards. So, again, in your journal, capture your thoughts and intuitions based upon your recent discoveries at minor cards. So, go back to the cards you looked at before, and is there anything you want to add to them? Now, please, these journal points in the lessons are where you stop and do the exercise that they relate to. Of course, you can watch all of this through in one go, but when you do the journal entries, do them in the order they come up in the lessons. There's a reason for that, because I'm trying to structure your reflections. And for me, there's no problem if you are writing about a card or writing about the Ace of Wands, and you did that 10 pages ago. There's no reason 20 pages later you can go back to the Ace of Wands and add things to it. It's all dependent on how you organize your journal. All right. We're going to look at the court cards in a later part of the course, but look at the fact that there are 4 of them, and when you look at those court cards, look at the ranks they're at, and look at the emotional connection you might or might not get to them, and from the suit and from the posture. And here's a thing to think about: for each of the court cards, see if the picture reminds you of somebody in your life. Again, the stereotype idea. It's not that that card means that, but it's a kind of nice mental hook for you to play with. As we come to the court cards later on in the course, you're going to find some very interesting things, because the artist, this lady called Pamela Coleman Smith, who actually retired and ran a home for sort of aged seamen at well, North Cornwall, actually near Bude, and she died there. She came away from a lot of this stuff, but and did that. But her artwork is brilliant in the sense that she had a style which Arthur E. Waite liked, but in many of the cards, she drew things that were familiar. So some of the cards, and particularly the court cards, are based on people she knew. And in one of the court cards, you might find a cat, and that cat was a cat that she knew and she had. So we'll talk more about that later, and I think that's a wonderful uh, side to these drawings of the cards. And we'll talk about the Thoth deck later, but I'm going to focus on these. As we go through the cards in more detail, one at a time, I'll bring in both the Thoth and the Rider-Waite deck, or sorry, Pamela Colman-Smith deck, and a few others to sort of ground you. If you don't have those two decks of cards and you don't intend to go out and buy them, that's fine. You can do this with any cards you want, except you might have to work a little bit to make the symbolism work. There are a number of card decks or tarot decks that are wonderful. The Merlin Tarot I love. I love the Arthurian Tarot because that's where I link to. But the symbolism is based upon the stories within their myths and doesn't quite match up unless you really know your Merlin stories and your Arthurian legends. And there's no reason why you can't do that, but there are links. Okay, so in our next lesson, we're going to start with the major arcana, and it will be the Fool. And so we're going to look at the Fool in detail, look at the symbolism within it. We're going to, have a good look at how the major cards are structured. We're going to find out why the Fool is numbered 0. You may already know that, but you may not. We're going to find out what the Fool represents and what makes the Fool totally different to the other major cards in the deck. Okay, so that's the next session. But I'm going to give you a week or two, maybe well, it could be 3 or 4 weeks by the time I post that lesson, for you to get to grips with the basic structure of the deck and your initial impressions from the cards that you're looking at. And as I say, I think it's exciting when you have an intuition about a card, and then later on that what we talk about actually matches the intuition or is challenging what I say, because that's where we're going to learn. We're going to learn at the junction, at the tension of what you know and what you think you know. And that's really important. Okay, that's it for this lesson. It's a bit shorter than some of them will be, but I hope that gives you a good start and a way to think. Of course, if you are one of these people that, a bit like me really, who likes to check up other sources and race ahead, that's fine. But I suspect if you're doing the practical work as suggested, and please do the practical work, do the journal work. If you don't do the journal work, this will become an academic rather than an emotional exercise. It'll be academic rather than emotional, rather than practical, rather than thought-provoking exercise. I will give you an example of why this is important. There is a mystical society called Builders of the Atridium, which was founded by a guy called Paul Foster Case, who we're going to probably talk about at some point. If you join the Builders of the Atridium, they base all their esoteric teachings on the tarot, and indeed the Rider-Waite, the Pamela Colman-Smith tarot. And one of the first things they do is they actually send you blanks, copies of these cards, i.e. outlines not coloured. And they tell you how to colour them. And as you're colouring them, you start to realise that the colours have specific meanings because they share that inner knowledge. Now, I'm not going to do that with you because if you really want to do this, I think designing your own tarot deck is a great idea. But what I'm saying to you is that glossing over the practical work actually doesn't really move you forward, it takes you back, because I might say something that I've thought you thought about or looked at, and it builds on that. And if you've not done that practical work, we get all confused in a fucking muddle. Okay, great. Last thing I'll say, um, I tend to be quite practical and down to earth about the tarot. I think they're an important tool. They're an important tool for personal growth and spiritual growth, but I don't want to get all kind of mystical and woo-woo with it. Um, I think that the artwork provides the key to deeper understanding, and that's about you. That's about the way that you're going to take this stuff. Okay, until next time.